are not able to attend live can receive a recording after the event. So we're recording now. My name is Suzanne Farmer, and I'm going to be handling a lot of the behind the scenes work today for the, I'm sorry, my kids' friends are texting me to see if they can go sledding. I'm going to be handling a lot of the behind the scenes work. And I'm actually the site director for a grant right now that Kentucky has through the U.S. Department of Education with 3 state, it's funded through the National Board, and we have 3 state agencies, the Kentucky Department of Education, the Education Professional Standards Board, and the Kentucky Department of Education are the 3 official partners on the grant. And I live in Danville, and I'm on release from the Danville Independent Schools for a full-time MOA with this grant to help to get teachers board certified, to support new teachers to get to the point where they could be ready for board certification, and to work with teachers so that after they're accomplished, they have career pathways as teacher leaders. And leading this conversation are Holly, Bloodworth, and Jolena. We're all board certified. And I board certified in early childhood at the time I was a preschool teacher, and renewed. I've renewed, and at the time when I renewed, I was a math interventionist through the Kentucky Center for Mathematics Math Achievement Fund grants. So, handling a lot of the chat box. So feel free to put questions in there if you have them, and let me know if you're having any technical problems too.
My name's Holly, and I'll be talking you through some of the information today along with Jolena. I've been certified for a good while and have recertified, so I really have a lot of connection with National Board Certification, and really for me, I feel like it's one of the best decisions that I ever made for me personally. I feel like it really took my teaching up to a new level and kind of gave me, I don't know, just more confidence in what I am able to do and how I'm able to reach my students. Jolena?
Hi, guys. There may be a little disconnect because I couldn't get my audio to work. You know, these techie problems on a snow day, so I'm called in twice. I'm on the phone and on your screen, so if there's a little disconnect there, just put it down to snow. But I'm so glad to be here with you guys. I agree with everything that Suzanne and Holly said. Becoming certified really just changed my whole thinking about doing my job. I mean, in my profession, but more than that, I just became more thoughtful in my interactions with my students, with their parents, with my coworkers. It changed my life. So, good morning.
All right. So, Suzanne, are you going to advance the slides for us? Okay. So, I think you're here today because you have probably been thinking about National Board Certification. You may have some questions about National Board Certification. And one of those things that you maybe have thought, maybe sometime, so we're glad that you're here, and maybe you'll find that this is the right time for you. Through this presentation, we'll be answering the questions that you see on the screen. If you can't see the questions there, we're just going to talk a bit about what it is, the process, just kind of what it entails. The deadline for signing up for this cycle is quickly approaching. It's the end of this month. So this is kind of a decision for this cycle that you would need to make pretty quickly. So we hope that you being on this call means that you have been thinking about it, and we're excited to be here to be able to kind of give you some information and then answer any questions that you might have.
Shall I read that, Holly, for folks
Yeah,
who can't?
we can just sort of take turns, Jolena.
Okay, and guys, if you can see this, I am reading it, but we do have folks who can't see it, so bear with us. First question was, what is National Board Certification? Since 1987, National Board of Professional Teaching Standards, they have established the profession's standard of accomplished teaching and created a system to determine if teachers meet those rigorous standards. NB certification is voluntary, performance-based, reflective, is a voluntary, performance-based, reflective peer review process that recognizes the complex nature of teaching and ongoing improvement. Whew. That's a big mouthful to say. It really is a system for teachers, by teachers, to where you can improve yourself. It's a self-directed process almost. We go on with our next bullet. It is the NBPTS, the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, is an independent nonprofit organization led primarily by classroom teachers, and more than 110,000 teachers in all 50 states have achieved National Board certification, over 3,000 in Kentucky.
You know, I think that's one part of National Board certification that I didn't anticipate was the connection that it creates across the United States with other teachers. It brings you into a network of highly professional teachers all across the 50 states. And I think that's one of the best, I guess, bonuses from National Board certification that I didn't really even anticipate.
I agree with that, Holly. I didn't realize that I knew I was doing something for myself and for my students at a local level in my classroom, but I did not realize I was joining almost this sorority fraternity of accomplished teachers that we just have a closer connection and support that I didn't realize I would join just by pursuing the process.
Right. You know, National Board certification is the same for anyone that pursues. So it kind of gives you an opportunity to talk about that process, to talk about the impact that it had, to really articulate the standards that are common across and the 5 core propositions, the things that we'll kind of be talking about in a little bit. But it does give you a special connection to other teachers that have pursued National Board certification. All right, the process has changed a little bit. If you've talked to teachers that have pursued, everyone kind of has their, it's not a war story, but it's that story of their certification. And it's changed. Back in 1994, there were 6 portfolio entries and 4 assessment center exercises. Then in 2001, there was a revision, and they changed it to 4 portfolio entries and 6 assessment centers. And now their National Board is in the process of creating a new system that is basically this. I mean, it's the same foundation, but now there are 4 components, and that includes the assessment center exercises. So, and we'll talk a little bit about how these 4 components, a key way that this process has changed is that now, National Board has listened to teachers, because teacher voice is important. And so they've listened and tried to make it not easier, but more accessible and able to do it over the course of a few years rather than super intense, close out the rest of the world, lock yourself in a room for a year and do National Board certification. So now it's a little more accessible, so you can still do all of the things you have to do as a teacher that is more than a full-time job, and be able to incorporate this opportunity for yourself.
Yes, you might hear somebody say, oh, it's easier now with the changes. No, the rigor is still there. It's just you know, they've made it more, as Holly said, accessible, more available for real life folks to do.
Right. Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, go ahead, Holly, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to expand on that and then go to this slide. Why the National Board revised its process. They took into account the latest research. They wanted to remove time and money barriers because in the past, there was folks said it took, you know, upwards over 400 hours to certify, and folks sometimes did not think that they had that time to commit with their family and with their lives, as well as the expense. Now there's such flexibility. Candidates have up to 5 years to complete, and starting in this cycle, when all the components are released, and we'll get into that in a second, but this year, you could complete it in 1 year if you want. So you have in essence, from 1 to 5 years to complete the process. It's more affordable because it was, you know, $2,500. Now it's down to about $1,900, with each component costing $475. And there is a $75 yearly registration fee. But the new process is just more efficient. Entries are grouped into the components, and you can concentrate on one task at a time if that's your preferred method of working. So the rigor, as I was saying, the rigor is still there. I get a little happy with people if they say that it's easier now. It's certainly not easier, but you're still showing that you're an accomplished teacher through these tasks, and you're meeting the rigor that is there in accomplishing them. It's more manageable now.
I just wanted to point out, because there's been a lot of questions in the chat box around Rank 1 and National Board as a comparison, and I'm not sure that everybody has access to the chat box on the call. So I know that Jolena and Holly will probably address that in a few slides, but I just wanted to, I'm answering those as they come up, but just to alert you that there will be a conversation about that too soon.
Okay.
Holly, do you need me to move to the next one, or do you?
Yeah, we've covered all of that. I need to figure out a cue. So we've already mentioned several of these things. The last slide talked about the things that had kind of changed, the reason for some changes. The things that have not changed are the standards. They, you know, are always going through slight revisions, you know, every once in a while just to keep updated, but the standards don't change. They're high, they're rigorous. The 5 core propositions we'll talk about those in a few slides. Those 5 core propositions, they're just the things that make us good teachers. They are interwoven through all of the components. They're the same for every teacher, and they do not change. The architecture of accomplished teaching is also woven throughout all of the components, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. Something else that has not changed, it's performance-based. It's a peer review model. So, you know, it is going to be based on what you are doing in your classroom with your students. And that is, to me, a huge difference between like a master's or rank 1 and national board process. You know, I learned a lot in my master's program. I'm not saying anything bad about my master's program, but often the things that I was learning in those classes were not something that was applicable to what I was doing right then. This is totally based on my classroom, my students, my impact on them. And so whether I was really doing this as a national board process, just that idea of thinking about everything I'm doing and the impact that I'm having on my students, I mean, that's amazing and an amazing opportunity for any teacher. There's an emphasis on content knowledge and on student learning. It is rigorous. We're not going to tell you it's not. We want it to be. We want it to be something, hard. It's not easy. It shouldn't be. Teaching's not easy. Retake candidates, I don't think there are any retake candidates on our call, but if you started under the old process, then you would stay under the old process. And then once you become National Board Certified, then you renew that certification every 5 years. You do not go through the whole process again. But what they have done is kind of broken that renewal process down into more component. So in 5 years, you will do basically another component. And what that does is just it makes sure that you are staying current in the field, that you are continuing to embed the 5 core propositions and follow, so that you can continue to say that you're National Board Certified. Every 10 years just seemed a little too long. Things change too much, so every 5 years seems to add more credibility to our certification. Okay.
The 5 core propositions are the absolute foundation basis of National Board Certification. And I mean, everything that you do and consider will come back to these 5 ideas. And really, they already do. If you, as a teacher, when you hear these, if you're like me, you will think, this is where I am. This is the heart of the matter already. So to very quickly address them, and then we'll go into them more thoroughly, they are proposition number 1. Teachers are committed to students and their learning. Number 2, teachers know the subjects they teach and how to teach those subjects to students. Number 3, teachers are responsible for managing and monitoring student learning. Number 4, teachers think systematically about their practice and learn from experience. And number 5, teachers are members of learning communities. So, I know I read through those rather quickly. We're going to go over them, but if you just stop and think about that, I hazard that everybody, that's, again, what you're doing every day, whether you're saying, oh, I'm doing this right now. It's just an internalized thought process that you already have. Now to go on to them a little more thoroughly, I believe. Oh.
Through the process as a candidate, and it looks like that has, moved a little bit. Connections are made between your instructional goals, your assessment, your planning, your planned activities. Uh-oh, something's covered up. And I don't remember what that says over there. I don't know.
I'm sorry, I should have caught that when I uploaded that.
That's okay. What would it be? Let's see. Instructional goals, assessment.
Would it be reflecting?
Probably reflecting, yeah.
I think reflecting.
So all of those, you're making those connections throughout your portfolio. And I mean, those are things that we're doing every day. So we wouldn't to be better at any of those and all of those things.
Okay, you will hear us talk a lot about the architecture of accomplished teaching, and that's where we take our 5 core propositions and we actually consider them within our own class. So proposition 1 was teachers are committed to students and their learning, and you have these questions that you answer to determine that to be committed to students and their learning. So if you can see, the first step, and it's kind of interwoven, we call it like a helix, like the DNA of accomplished teaching. Question number 1 is your students. Who are they? Where are they now? What do they need? And in what order do they need it? So ultimately, where do I begin with this class? That is, being committed to your students and their learning.
Go watch a movie.
And then from that, you move on and you're setting your high and worthwhile appropriate goals for these students, where they are, again, considering and still considering where they are at this time and in this setting. And back to what Holly was saying before about this is your classroom. And I love that. This really gets into the meat of it. It's your classroom or my classroom. Because, you know, sometimes when I was getting my master's and I was driving to, you know, the big city of Richmond versus Hyden, Kentucky, you know, the things that some of my classmates were thinking about in my assignments were not the same that was going on in my little school in the mountains. So, again, I appreciated this of being able to delve into what was happening in my school. So after you set your goals, you move to, you know, teachers we, you know our subject and how to teach them, and also we're responsible for managing that. So we're going to implement our instruction designed to attain those goals. So again, we're always considering what our students need. After that, you know, so we're managing and monitoring their learning. In that light, we evaluate what they have accomplished for these goals during the instruction. And that leads us to reflect on student learning and the effectiveness of our instructional design, particular concerns and issues. And as we go through that, that's how we're systematically thinking about our practices and learning from it. And then we're going to set new worthwhile goals and begin again. Really, the process continues over and over and over. We always are evaluating where our students are, where do we want those students to get, and kind of follow this pathway to make that happen, and then start new goals for them. And then finally, of course, we are, you know, members of the learning community, so we share with our colleagues and we learn from our colleagues. Holly, do you want to add something here?
Well, just, I mean, these two things are just the foundations of all of the components that you'll work with. This is the framework for how you demonstrate the standards. And just, you know, I think a lot of this is familiar because of our PBS system and, you know, the things that we're doing in Kentucky. I feel like, you know, we in Kentucky are kind of ahead of the game from a lot of other states. So this is kind of part of what we do anyway. So this is a chance for us to just like take our teaching up a notch. Okay, Suzanne? So accomplished teaching is defined by the standards, not by your candidate support provider, not by other NBCTs, but how I like to think about it is when you become National Board Certified, what that is saying is that you demonstrate those standards. So it's not someone else giving you a label. It's you proving that you meet those standards. So through your components, you are giving evidence of how you meet those standards. And in order to certify, you have to have enough evidence that's clear and concise to prove that you meet them. And then the most beautiful thing of National Board Certification is that student learning is at the heart of the process. I mean, that's why we do what we do, it's all about the impact that we have on students. So anything that we can do to make ourselves better is going to help our students and help ourselves too. And that's a phrase that will just become part of you. Impact on student learning, you know, is what kind of impact does this have on student learning? So that's something that just becomes ingrained in your thought process through National Board Certification.
The eligibility prerequisites, in order to become a candidate, these are the things that must be in place. You must possess a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution and have completed at least 3 years of successful teaching at one or more early childhood, elementary, middle, or secondary school. So you do not have to be at your same school for 3 years. You just have to have, or 3 consecutive years, but you have to have taught 3 years at an elementary, middle, secondary school, or an early childhood program. And you're also going to, provide proof of having an unencumbered state teaching license for each of those 3 years completed.
All right.
You do. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, that was good. That's good. All right. Fees. Since you can now spread it over 3 years to try every component, you would pay a $75 registration fee each year that you are working on this. So, and that you have to register and buy components by January 31st. So that is true. So that's something that you've got to think about. There's a $475 fee for each component. So right now, component 1 is available, component 2, and component 3. Component 4 is not available until next year. I saw someone in the chat box ask about doing it all in 1 year. Well, you can't this year. It wouldn't even be a possibility because the component 4 doesn't come out until next year. Starting next cycle, then you could, if you wanted to, do it all in 1 year. And it's hard with the kind of things that teachers have to do, but it is possible. You need to understand, this is the first time this option has been available. In the past, under the old, systems, you had to do it all in 1 year. So it is possible. I think it's beautiful that you can spread it out. It can mean that you don't have to put everything else on hold. So, so you would need to pay your registration fee. You would go online. You would set up an account, pay your $75 registration fee, and buy a component by January 31st. What you would need to do.
And I apologize. I may have given people, I did say this year you could complete the whole program. I meant the coming cycle. I misspoke. I realize that now. I meant the 2016-17 cycle. And so if people are thinking back, Jolena said we could do it in 1 year. I meant the next cycle that will be available. This year, as this cycle we're in right now, which ends next, or the deadlines for payment are at the end of next week, you could do up to 3 components if you registered for all 3 right now. So I apologize if I confused. Your fees can be paid. The good news is if you must register by 31st, but you have a little more time because you pay online via credit or debit card. So you might have a little window there with your credit card. Because you can pay with Visa or MasterCard only, and it is online. You are responsible for confirming receipt by the National Board for any payment. So, and you will get confirmation numbers and stuff. You just have to be sure you keep up with those. And after your payment has been processed, then you will be able to view your fees as they're posted to your account at www.boardcertifiedteachers.org. So once your account is set up, you can keep track of what you've paid and what you still need to take care of as well.
And I just saw a question come up. You don't have to pay for the whole process up front. This year, if you would pay the $75 registration fee, and then you may buy one component, $475, and do one component. Or you could do 2 components or 3. You pay for what you're going to do this cycle. And so I'm sorry.
No. Holly, I appreciate you jumping on to clarify that. Another question that's come up in the chat box that I think is worth mentioning and addressing verbally is some question about what is a cycle. So even though it's confusing because we have calendar years and school years. So National Board is working in school years. So this cycle is this school year. So even if you started working, some people started working on this in the fall, they are in the same cycle. This is all one cycle. 15-16 is one cycle. and all of the payments for that one school year are due January 31st. So if you're doing anything that falls under this school year, you have to pay for that next week, or whenever the 31st is, a week and a half. So like what Holly's saying is, if you wanted to register, your registration fee is $75. If you wanted to do one component, and I don't recommend trying to do all three starting now, because you have to submit those portfolio entries. Is it May 15th or May 19th?
I think it's May 18th or something. Okay. There's another slide.
In the middle of May, and then you would have to have your test completed by June 15th. So it's a lot to do. You'd have to do component 2 and 3, and if you haven't started them, to do 2 of them right now would be tough. It's possible, but I don't recommend it. And then you could, but whatever you decide to do and submit by the May, or to take the test, that's what's due on January 31st. And then the next cycle, you could actually start working on it as soon as you get your kids in August, and you wouldn't have to pay for any of those components until January, most likely, of next year. So that's how the cycles fall.
And the directions are online, and you don't have to pay to get the directions. So Suzanne is right. I mean, you could go ahead and start as soon as the next school year begins with your new students, and not pay until January for the next component. All right, I think we've covered that slide. And here are some dates and deadlines. So registration for this cycle, the 15-16 cycle, you could have started registering in May, but it closes January 31st. The fee deadline is the 31st. If changing what you're going to do, changing a component, changing certificate, that would have to be done by the 31st. To withdraw would have to be done by the 31st. Then when you actually submit your components, the window for that opens April 1st, and everything is submitted online. Used to, we had this big box, and you had to carefully package all the things in the box and then turn it over to someone to deliver it, and you felt like you were mailing your baby or something. It was really kind of something else. So now it's all submitted online, and the end date is May 18, so it has to be submitted by May 18. Component 1 is the assessment center. So as we're talking about components, we'll talk a little bit more about what each component is. But component 1 is the assessment center, and that window opens March and it closes June 15. So you could actually take the assessment center part after school is out, considering we don't go through June for school. So June 15 is the end of that. And then scores, the hardest part is the wait, no, not the hardest part, but a hard part is waiting for the scores. And you will find out how you did on that component or the components that you submit on or before December 31st. But if you're going to do then another component, I wouldn't wait until then to start. I would start the next component that you plan to do when school starts. Build it into your plans of school and just make it part of what you're doing. Okay?
The fields of certification. The National Board has 25 certificate areas, and they're based on your developmental level of the teacher student and the teacher subject areas. And there's sometimes some confusion about this, that folks have trouble, and I think I even saw it in the chat box, have trouble deciding what area to pick. So when you determine your certificate area, be certain that you take into consideration the age of your student and your already state certificate. there's always confusion. You teach not for the job you're doing or want, but what you fit your certificate area. Sometimes a lot of folks, if you may be a middle childhood generalist like myself, you may end up departmentalized if you're upper elementary. And so, for example, I only teach now math and one language arts class. But I had to do the middle childhood generalist certificate, so I had to do components for social studies and science as well. So, kind of think about that as you're picking your area. The list of certificates and links to the standards, because each certificate has its own set of standards. Now, the standards are, and they're in general very similar to each other, the sets of standards, because they're all based on, specific ideas, but they do take into account the ages that they're considering working with. But you will, you can look that up at, again, the boardcertifiedteachers.org website. I think it's a little more iffy for folks in the elementary than it is for middle school and high school, because you guys are already more subject-based. Holly or Suzanne, do you want to add anything about that? Because that's a place we get a lot of questions about.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've heard people say or ask that's a little bit of a misconception is, let's say I'm a regular education teacher, but someday I might like to teach special ed. If I get this special ed certificate, then am I certified to teach special ed? And no, that doesn't change your state certificate. What your certificate needs to match what you are teaching. And then the state does provide right now $2,000 above your rank change when you're certified if you are teaching within your certificate area. So I'll be happy to kind of counsel people that are wondering which one to do. I mean, I taught third grade, so at that time I was teaching first grade. So I did early childhood generalist. Third grade is about as high as I could go. I either have to teach that grade or mentor or coach people that are teaching that grade. So a literacy is a great one for a primary teacher, I think, because literacy is now so embedded throughout our standards. But anyway, we could, especially if you're elementary person, I could definitely help you maybe decide which one to do. And be sure and look at that www.boardcertifiedteachers.org. There are two websites. One is the older website that is a little more connected to the older version of National Board Certification for those people that are still going through that. Be sure to look at this website.
And there's also on that boardcertifiedteachers.org, when you go to the first-time candidate, like for candidates, there's like a first-time candidate or returning candidate tab. And on that, there's actually a document that they've created on how to choose your certificate area if you're having questions. That's helpful. And again, like Holly, I think Holly's right that when, in my experience, it's hardest for elementary teachers to pick their area because they have sometimes a couple of options or choices, more so than a specialist in other degrees. So Holly brought up some really important points for Kentucky teachers. If you're in another state, the rules are a little different, and some states do honor what your board certification is in, but Kentucky does not.
Suzanne, do you want to click on that site just because I think it's a little hard to figure out where to go on that site? Maybe not. It doesn't look like is it going?
I'm trying. If it doesn't, I'll just open another window. I'm spinning. Hold on.
But I think it might be helpful. I usually try to show people how that, sometimes you know, when you have to click on the different things in that graph. We can go on and do that at the end.
Let's do it at the end. I've got it up, but I'm a little nervous. It's saying my internet's unstable.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, is it your turn, Jolena? I think maybe, I don't know.
I'll do it because I'm here. Okay, well, we're all here, but I'll do it. Okay, so the design of the revised process, now we used to call our components now entries. So if I misspeak, I'm working on that. Now you have 4 components that you use to show your accomplished teaching. The first component is content knowledge, and that is only assessment center based. It is your assessment. So you will go to an assessment center, and as somebody said, is that just a test? It is a test. It is composed of multiple choice or selected responses and extended responses. I think we have a slide that goes into more detail. Component 2 is a written component about the differentiation of instruction. So you'll, pick students and, answer questions and work through a cycle of teaching with them. Component 3 is known as your video component, and you will video yourself teaching in your classroom based on a series of instructions and questions. And component 4 is your effective and reflective practitioner. That shows you more in a broader role as not only a teacher, but as a member of a learning community, as a leader in a learning community. So each component has very specific instructions and tasks for you to show that you are completing, to show you're an accomplished teacher. So even though it seems very broad right now, when you do get on the site and you start seeing your instructions, it gets much clearer as to what you're supposed to do for each component.
Right. And component 4 is the one that is not released yet. It's the one, they're still in the revision process for that component. We've heard talk that it will involve assessment literacy. So we're not sure exactly what that will look like, but we'll find out soon. Okay. So this slide, I think we've already talked about everything on this. It was kind of a rollout process, so you may have some friends that have started the process and are not finished yet. But in 14-15, they released a couple. This year, they released an additional component. Next year, they released the last component. And at that point, the 16-17 cycle is when all the components are available and you could finish in 1 year, or you always have the choice of stretching it out over 3 years with a couple of extra years if you need to retake something. If you are in career and technical education, that is a little bit delayed because they're revising their standards more. So if that's your area, maybe stay on after and we can talk to you a little bit more. And it looks like the world language and music are also a little delayed.
When you're completing your certification, and again, with the new cycle that you can register for starting in May, it may, as Holly was saying, it may take anywhere from 1 to 5 years depending on the approach you take. But these are your rules that you will need to keep in mind. You must attempt each of the 4 components within the first 3 years of your candidacy. So there's no minimum or maximum score required to retake a component. You have up to 2 retake attempts for each component, and you can retake at any time during a 5-year window. So that's where we get from saying you have 1 to 5 years total. Retake years do not have to be concurrent or consecutive, and you can have a year when you take no components. However, this does not extend your 5-year window. So the 5 years are consecutive. Once you sign up for your initial component, in reality, you will have 5 years at the maximum to get everything completed successfully. The highest score received for individual components will always be used for the total score calculation. That may sound like a lot of information and kind of confusing, especially if you're not looking at the screen. do we need to expand on that a little bit more, Holly or Suzanne?
Well, I think we've kind of alluded to this several times already, that it is a process. You have to attempt all the components in 3 years. And then you have 2 additional years where you can retake. And if you're new, if you've not thought about National Board Certification at all, there is like, you are working for a passing score, and there's not really a minimum or maximum score that says you have to retake something, but you're looking to get the score to pass. So if you retook something and it's kind of borderline, you don't have to retake it the next year. You could wait and see how you did on the next one. You know, some of my components I scored really high, and there was one I did not score very well at all, but it balanced out. So I think we talk more about that later in the PowerPoint. So component 1 is content knowledge, and it is computer-based. You will go to a designated assessment center. There are, I know there's one in Nashville, Louisville, I mean, some of the bigger areas. Where?
Lexington, sorry.
Probably Cincinnati. It doesn't even have to be in Kentucky. This is a national test. So if you wanted to go to Hawaii, I think they have one there. So that sounds pretty good today. So there are 45 selected response questions and 3 constructed response questions. You will be demonstrating knowledge of pedagogy and your content area. So for me as an early childhood generalist, you know, I did the like a pilot or a I don't remember what it was called, but like where you would go just to help them calibrate and stuff. So I did like a practice, one of the new version. And the 45 multiple choice questions were, you know, they were kind of, some of them were scenario based, some of them were pretty straightforward, but they did involve some knowledge of theory that would be applicable for an early childhood generalist. And if you are in a content area like at a higher level, then I think you actually do some math or those kinds of things. But for early childhood generalist, it was more based on developmentally appropriate practices for an early childhood person. And so that test is going to focus on the age range of your certificate and what area it is. So if it's a generalist, it's going to be more general knowledge and it's more pedagogical. And if you're a specialist, like a math person or a music person, it's going to focus more on the content for your area. There's a question about, is it a good idea to start with component 1 or should I do it last? You know, this is a new process. So, you know, the way that you can choose things, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. It kind of depends on how much you're going to put in studying. For me, it's important to remember that those standards that are part of your certificate, that's what you have to provide evidence that you those standards. So you would have to figure out a way to really internalize those standards so they come out as you're answering the questions at the assessment center. So that means you would really have to look at them and think about them and make them part of your daily practice. If you're doing a different component, then you are doing that as part of that component. So I don't know. It just depends on how much effort you put in kind of preparation for that component, I would think. For me, I don't think I would start with that one. I think I would want to internalize those standards through completing another component, but I think everybody's different. So That's the beauty of this new process, is that you have choices. You know, if somebody asked me that question and said they were terrified of assessment center things, and so through our conversation, we decided she should start with that one, because if she is so terrified that it's just going to, it's going to paralyze her in the end, she didn't want that. So get that done. If you can do, she thought, if I can do component 1, then I can do this. I mean, for me, that doesn't really scare me. So I don't think I would start with component 1. So I think your rationale is just based on you, your personality, your situation. I don't know. What do you all think, Suzanne and Jolena?
I agree basically with you that I personally, because of the old system, you know, the time frame for the old system and this one, the assessment center came later in the year. So I felt like that I was doing my study for the assessment center while completing the entries, which would now be components. But that's me, and I'm very interested in your story you told about this girl who, or I don't know who was, this person that was concerned about assessment center, because I've always felt that, you know, I'm a good test taker, so it didn't worry me as much. Right. So again, I agree, it's a very individualized decision.
I've actually recommended for quite a few people to go ahead and take the test for a couple of reasons. One is that in many respects, I think that preparing for the 3 constructed responses is something I recommend everybody do no matter when you take the test, in terms of like looking at some released items, timing yourself with a couple of them to get like the hang of it, and to actually try it on the computer format that they have so that you can get a sense of navigating the website. So I think there's some prep no matter how
I agree.
Standards. But like the multiple choice, I think is one of those things. I took the pilot the field testing of it, and it's the kind of thing that's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to study for that. Like, you know it or you don't. It's sort of like, kind of like a praxis type thing where it's a lot of methods and theory. At least mine was, and in my certificate area. So I felt like I recommended people to go ahead and take it if they had the money and felt like they wanted to get a sense of how they were doing, because one of the things that's really nice about component 1 is you get 4 scores back. So you get a score for each constructed response, and you get a score for your selected response, your multiple choice. So what's nice about that is that you'll know exactly how you did when you get those scores back. And if you really bombed one part of it, you could just redo that part of it, or you can decide later to redo that part of it, but you'll at least know where you stand on your test, which is 40% of your overall score. So it's kind of nice to know what you're dealing with, and if you want to retake something, you can think about that later. But it's kind of nice to have that out of the way to get a sense of how you're doing overall, if that makes sense. But it's an entirely personal decision. Like Holly said, she wasn't worried about the test, or, wouldn't have been worried about it if she'd had the option of taking it whenever she wanted. So for her, she might have wanted to wait until the end. I had people that were super worried about it that I mentored last year that took it and actually did really well. And now they know they don't need to worry about it. Or they might have missed, done really poorly on one of the 4 parts. And now they know that. And maybe not poorly enough they need to redo anything. But now they know where they stand.
Good. All right. Go ahead. So this continues component 1. There are 3 constructed responses. They're 30 minutes each. There are 45 selected response. So there are a few field test questions that don't count, and we've already talked about that other stuff.
Component 2, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, it's known as a differentiation of instruction, and it's a completion of a classroom-based portfolio comprised of samples of student work and your accompanying written commentary. So you will be given a time period that this teaching would occur in, and you're going to kind of analyze your students' work, basically. Your selection of work samples that demonstrate students' growth over time, and a written commentary that analyzes the teacher's instructional practices. So basically, you have a unit of instruction, and then you do the instruction, you plan the instruction, you do the instruction, and then you reflect on the instruction with student work samples.
And remember, all of the directions are online, so if you're trying to decide between component 2 or component 3, you can read exactly what you have to do and all the questions that you have to answer for that component before you sign up. So, all right. Next slide. So components 3 and 4, number 3 focuses on teaching practice and learning environment. It is video. It's video-based. You're going to be writing commentary, talking about student engagement and the teacher's impact on the learning. You're going to be, there's some interdisciplinary ideas behind that for the generalist, I know. So there are a lot of things. You have to read the directions carefully, and it's kind of pulling a lot of things together. Because another part of what they're trying to get at is your learning environment. So how you're setting that up, how you're getting students to talk to each other, and engagement, all of those things, along with really analyzing what you're doing and the impact that it's having on student learning. And then number 4, it's effective and reflective practitioner. We're not sure exactly what that's going to look like. So we'll see.
So if you want to get started, and again, you have a short window if you want to do this cycle, but it is doable. You will go to the boardcertifiedteachers.org website, which I think we're going to go to in just a second, and confirm that you are actually eligible back to those, requirements, top 3 years, have a bachelor's degree, have your certificate, an unencumbered certificate. You'll pay your $75 annual fee, your registration fee. You'll select the components that you want to complete for this cycle, and then pay the fee of $475 per component. You'll review the standards and rubrics for your certificate area, and you will do that continuously. You will review the standards and rubrics for your certificate area, and you, of course, can do those, as Holly and Suzanne both said. You can do those before you pay any money. You can check on what you will have to do to become certified before you commit any money. So, but that's the getting started process.
All right. You will receive an email prior to the start of the testing window, and you will actually need to make an appointment to do that. Then you will get an email prior to the eportfolio submission window that will give you voucher codes and login information so you can upload your written work and evidence for component 2 or 3. And I honestly, I've worked with a lot of candidates. Mine was done through sending in a box, but everyone that I've worked with has been really comfortable with the eportfolio process. The very first year they started that, it was, it took a long time to load things. That was really the only glitch, was that it sometimes took a really long time to load. But I think they've worked a lot of those things out. And last year, no one complained or had any problems with actually submitting their things online. So I think they've done a good job of getting that all set.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we alluded to this before, but we'll go back to it. Scoring is going to be standards-based and standards-specific. The evidence that you provide will be clear, consistent, and convincing. There are rubrics for each component and certificate area, and those are, available to you. There will be separate scores for each component attempted, And there's information to assist you in making decisions on whether or not to retake if necessary. All Component 1 constructive response exercise will be scored by 2 independent assessors, and 1 or more assessors will score each of your responses for all certificate areas. So you may, your components as you submit them, it's not just subjective to one scorer. You will be, scored by a trained assessor to determine if you have clear, consistent, and convincing evidence to show accomplished teaching.
Okay. So in Kentucky, and there may be some people on the call that are not from Kentucky, but if you are from Kentucky, we do have some things that apply to us. So if you are a teacher that attains national board certification, this is huge. You then have rank 1. I mean, so as long as you have a master's degree, that gives you then your rank 1. If you don't have a master's degree, once you get your master's degree, then you have your rank 1. So that's huge. I mean, rank 1 is huge. It's a giant, I mean, for me, it's like $4,000 or $5,000 pay raise. And, let's face it, the sooner you get rank 1, multiply that, by your career, that's how much additional revenue you can have for your family. So the earlier you get your rank 1 in your career, the longer you have to make that additional bonus. You do already have to have your rank 2, which is a master's, to get that rank 1. Right now in Kentucky, there's a $2,000 annual salary supplement that is provided by the state, and that's for the life of your certificate. It would be 5 years because it's now 5 years until you recertify. But once you recertify, then you still have it. Now, that is a legislative decision. That could change, but you always are going to have your rank 1. Even if you don't recertify after 5 years, you still have your rank 1. Then also, there are jumpstart training. Those are kind of orchestrated by KEA. You don't have to be a KEA member, but Jolene and I both work with jumpstart training, and that's a great way to bring candidates together to give you just that, a jumpstart on accomplishing your components. There's one coming up in Western Kentucky at the end of this month, and I haven't looked at the schedule, but there are several scheduled across the state. You also can get a mentor through this process if you would like one. It's not, you don't have to have a mentor, but I think it's really nice to have somebody to talk to that is an MBCT that can help read your things. So then also there is an additional incentive that, Suzanne, can you still apply for the Component 3 incentive? Or is that deadline passed?
Actually, Jolena might know more about that. That's an incentive through the Gates grant through KEA. And the initial deadline for that was January 15th. I don't know if that's going to be extended or not. I don't heard.
As of right now, I don't think it was extended. However, if I can check on that, and it wasn't something that you necessarily applied for, that grant was for if anyone who, the first 400 candidates who signed up for Component 3. So as long as they were by the deadline, received a $150, will receive, they've not received it yet, but once they've paid all their fees after January 31st, then they will receive a $150 stipend for that. So if they choose to extend that, then that will, if you're one of the first 400 candidates to sign up for Component 3, you would get it. And I don't think that we had 400 candidates, so that may be extended. To answer some other questions, so that was what some people were considering as a scholarship for Jumpstart, because the Jumpstart Component 3 Jumpstart I believe, was $100 to attend. So they felt that that $150 could pay for that. There is a jump start scheduled for the end of this month in Mount Vernon for Central Kentucky as well. The issue with that is really the deadline for signing up for that is this evening. So if you would attend the Mount Vernon, because that's my jump start. So if you are not my, but it's the one I'm kind of in charge of. If you take this weekend to determine that you want to attend that jump start, if you can contact me early Monday morning, the deadline may have passed, but I may be able to still get you in there. The way to find the jump start is under the KEA website, and then go under the professionalism tab. So www.kea.org, and under the professionalism tab, there will be trainings, and you'll see Jumpstart or NBCT training. Again, you do not have to be a KEA member. I know that the component 2 trainings or Jumpstarts, I think, are $50, and the component 3 training is $100, but there's PD. Usually your district will grant you PD for attending. And I can talk more about that if people have specific questions either on here, or you can contact me as well. Is there any other? Oh, and if you want a mentor, you don't have to attend the Jumpstart to get a mentor. Contact me, and I will connect you with the folks that you need to get a mentor. If you are going to sign up, if I don't contact you, somebody will contact you hopefully soon, as soon as you sign up. If they don't, again, contact me, and I will make sure that you get a paid mentor that's free to you but paid for us. Thank you, Suzanne, for putting my contact info in there.
Also, if you're close to Bowling Green, you might check the Western University. Sometimes they have some Jumpstart kinds of things too. So if that's close to you, you might check the Western University website too. I'm not really sure what they have going on, but sometimes they have some support things too. All right.
Did we talk about the innovator incentive?
Oh, no. Why don't you talk about that, Suzanne?
All right. So one of the things that we've learned in Kentucky, we were actually studying this a little more than some of the other states, because we have a statute on the books that we have a goal that by the year 2020 we'll have at least one board certified teacher in every school in Kentucky. We know that if you have a board certified teacher in your school, that person is a really good role model or mentor or encourager to get other people board certified in the building. So it's hard to be the first one or to get the first one. And it really takes some courage to be that innovator. I know, I think Holly and I were both the first in our schools, and Jolena was the first in her district. And it can be kind of scary and hard to be that first person. So we know that teachers, looking at our data last year in Kentucky, that were in schools that don't have a board certified teacher already, were half as likely to become a candidate, even with our special recruitment to try to reach those teachers in those schools. So this year what we're doing to help with that is we have offered what we're calling an innovator incentive. And this is, there's not a deadline in terms of when you would have to purchase your components other than the national board deadline for that. But you do have to apply for our incentive, and that, if you email me, I can also give you that link, or I will put it in the chat box. And that incentive is for $275 reimbursement after the submission of a component. So you'd have to pay for everything now. You wouldn't get that reimbursement back until after May, when you would get $275 back, which is half of the cost of the registration fee and one component. It can only be used once for one component. So if you did 2 components this year, you could only get the $275, and it's only for teachers, again, that are in schools without MBCTs. If somebody just certified in the fall in your building, then that you would still count as getting that innovative incentive innovator incentive. And also if that NBCT, if you have an NBC, if the only one in your building is like, let's say a principal, then you would still qualify too. If you have any questions about whether or not you would qualify, we have data on the schools that I would encourage you to go ahead and apply, unless you know you've got like 3 in your building or something.
All right. Let's go to the next. Oh, all right. Jolena.
Okay, so to help you make the decision, you're going to, and we've kind of talked about this as we've gone through the slides, but you're going to analyze and reflect on the time that you have to give this process. Because it does, although the time it is, because they've changed the process, the time is spread out, but you still have to commit to, you know, some steps you must take to get this done. So you're going to reflect on the time you have to actually make this happen. You're also going to think about the resources that you already have, or ones that you need to require to give it your best effort. And those resources may, you know, consider, they may be financial resources, they may be time resources, they may be, you know, life management resources like childcare, things of that nature. But you again, make an individualized, you know, determination. Are you ready at this point in time to make this or to pursue this? A way to consider that is you're going to maybe contact an MBCT in your certificate area. If you don't, you know, if there are very few in your district, you can always, you know, contact me or Suzanne or Holly or, you know, someone else to either help you get in contact with somebody or to talk to you personally about this. Also, determine what kind of support your school district or your school itself or your region, what support is in that area. And again, your administrators, sometimes they're very, very supportive. I was very lucky to have a very supportive principal and other co-workers through this process, and hopefully that would be the case for you as well. And then you've got to see if there are, you know, grants available. We've touched on that. Like, you know, for the incentive that Suzanne just talked about, if you're a school with no MBCTs, you might end up with the Component 3 grant. Just you got to determine what financial resources are available to you as well. But everybody, you have to decide, is this right for you at this time in life?
Was that it?
There's one more that just basically sources and resources as you're making your decision too. There we go. So we talked about the website. Are we going to be able to go to that website now?
Yeah, I can. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about on this one before I switch the screen?
No.
Okay, right. I'm going to go ahead and switch then. Okay, can you all see this, board certified teachers?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so I'm gonna, if you go to the Get Started, this is where, if you haven't already created an account and registered, this is where you'll see these steps here, which is where you would actually create an account, and this is where you pay for things. This For Candidates tab is really, really helpful where you're going to find information. After you go to 4 candidates, along the left, you'll see like first time, retake, renewal, and on and on. And you're going to go to this first time, or you can click on it where it says first time and returning candidates in the middle. It doesn't really matter. It's going to take you to the same page. And there's a lot of resources here. Some that I think are especially important to note is this first document, which is Certificate, Standards, and Instructions. When you scroll down, the guide to National Board Certification has an overview for everyone with a lot of answers to questions. This choosing the right certificate area is the one I was mentioning before if you're having some questions about what your certificate area should be. There were some questions in the chat box around special education, and this is a place where you may want to read a little more about what that special ed certificate looks like and some of the specialties within that. Then the Assessment Center Policy Guidelines, if you're looking at Component 1, and the scoring guide is really helpful when people have questions about weighting, the weights for the different component areas, and what your score results look like and things like that. I'm going to go ahead and click on this Certificate, Standards, and Instructions. When you go to this, hold on. When you go to this, there's along the left-hand column at the top where it says Certificate Areas in Discipline and Developmental Level, along this left-hand column is where you'll find your certificate area. And then each one of these columns has the instructions for Component 1, 2, and 3, and then the standards for that certificate area. So I'm going to just, as an example, I'm going to look at the Early Childhood Generalist, which is under Generalist Early Childhood ages 3 to 8. When you click on Component 1, the directions will actually come up, and there's, it takes a second to load, but I recommend whenever you get into any of these actually printing them off. This is a place where you can ask your school for help too, but you can print these at school because this is your professional growth. If you're on a copy diet, this is something where you can talk to somebody at your central office or your principal about having them copy some of these things for you, because it's a lot of paper once you do it. This is an overview of everything you need for Component 1, and then there's some released samples in here too. I'm going to, hold on, we close, go back. Component 2, what's important to note about that is it's going to be a zip file. And there's lots of things when you download that component, and free. Those are both zip files. There'll be some instructions that are general for everyone in that certificate area. There's a lot of forms that they'll be included, like videotape permission forms or student work sample forms, some context forms. But then there's going to be one file in each of those that's specific to your certificate area. And that will have the name of your certificate area and the file name, and that one's super important in terms of understanding your directions. So then the last thing that I want to note that's really important is your standards. Most of the certificate areas, the standards, don't be alarmed, are about 100 pages. So so that, again, when I say print them off at school, this is a reason to do that. So there's a lot of margin space in your standards. So I think, let's see if it'll let me pull these up. There's a index here, so you can see that the EC Gen 1 is about 90 pages long. There's some overview, but once you get into the standards and that architecture of accomplished teaching helix, let me show you where they actually start. So then when I look to Standard 1, you can see there's a lot of margin space in all of these standards. And one of the strategies that people have been using for a long time with National Board, and it's one of the things that we promote through the Jumpstarts, is to start reading your standards really early. And I think that Casey talked about that in the chat box as a piece of advice for people if you haven't done it already, that it's helpful if you do this first. So I don't recommend trying to read them all in one sitting. I didn't, but maybe you're somebody who can. they actually have language that's really, I find it pretty easy to read. That it feels like they're real examples from real classrooms, and a strategy that's really helpful is to highlight it in different colors. So like use a green highlighter if it's something that you're doing a lot and you know you're doing it and you can explain how you're doing it and you can give an example. I recommend highlighting that in green, and then in the margin just making a note about what you do, because that's now your evidence that you can use in your write-up. Yellow, maybe if it's something you think you do pretty well but you're not really sure if you have an example or evidence that you can cite. And maybe like pink if this is something you know you're not doing well and you need to change your behaviors so that this is something you can grow in this year, so that you can do it better. Maybe blue if it's something that you want to read more about or research or something. So just take a lot of notes and highlight a lot, because then you don't have to read them again as much as you have to read your highlighting and your notes again. And you can review that when you're writing to make sure you're including the language of the standards and your evidence in your write-up. When you go to write components 2 and 3 and 4 in your instructions, one of the things it does is it lists the standards that this component is hitting. So make sure that when you see those standards, that those are the ones that you're really focusing on for that write-up and pulling from the language. One of the ones that people struggle with the most, I think, I know Holly and Jolena can speak to this as well, but in all the certificate areas I deal with, I think that standard 3 is really hard for people to get their head around, which is equity, fairness, and diversity. And so I recommend people start with that one, because in every one of your portfolio entries, it's going to ask you to talk about equity and access. This is the standard that's going to help you to understand how to answer those prompts. Holly and Jolena, I'm going to mute, and if there's things you need me to navigate to on the site that you want to point out, I can. Just tell me where you want to go.
Well, those were the main things that I wanted to point out on that site, because I think it can be tricky when you're looking at that a little document, this one that you're on right now. Like, just sometimes people don't realize you click on those different components and the standards to get to your certificate area stuff. I would, you've got today and probably a few more days of being inside. This would be a great time to really get at those standards, to really look at the components and decide what you want to do. I'm going to give you my email in the chat box also. If you've got questions, I'll give you my cell number too, because I'm just going to be home. If you want to just talk to me and talk through some of this, I'd be happy to. As you look at the different components, you'll see that different components focus, like all of the standards are important for the whole process, but different components really zero in on different parts of the standards. So you'll want to look at that. And I hope we've been helpful today in answering some of your questions. And I think that's all I have for today.
And I want to encourage you all, since we're finished, if you want to grab the mic and just talk. If you have a question and you don't feel like typing stuff in the chat box, it can be easier sometimes if you talk through something. But I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point too. And then if you have questions, I'm not in any hurry. My kids are outside sledding and they're happy. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.